Hello, welcome to the Digital Service Coalition's 2023 webinar series, Defining Digital. I am Traci Walker, the Executive Director of the Digital Services Coalition, and I'd like to welcome to all of you to what I think is going to be a fun and enlightening conversation, kind of hoping to get into really defining and thinking about these terms that we kind of throw around so much between government and industry. So the Education Committee, along with members of the coalition, are working hard on our mission to be a trusted partner of the digital service community by having timely and relevant discussions and education material. So as we're kicking this off, this is a means to meet one of our strategic goals, and that is around the idea of creating a shared language between industry and government around terms most commonly used or misused in digital services. What this looks like for us is that we're using this as a three-part series. We are starting today with a webinar, and so we're learning from industry and government subject matter experts why these terms are important, how they're best described and used, or sometimes, as I said, misused or misapplied, and where does the confusion kind of lay between those. And then following today's presentation, we will host in April a workshop, and this workshop will bring together the panelists, additional subject matter experts, government and industry to create a current interpretation that works for all of us as we can describe the best practices. My background is in acquisition, and a lot of times one of our most challenging things was always to say, well, what are the industry best practices for X? So if we can kind of get to that common understanding or terminology between us, I think that'll go a long way for us having the ability to understand what makes good digital service, digital transformations, customer experience, product management, and so on. After we finish what we're doing with the webinar and the workshop, we're going to then use that information to provide continuing education. We're not exactly sure what the product of this is going to be yet, but that's what we're also going to do, user research, user experience with everybody to see what is going to be the best way to provide this education information back to everybody. Is it through a playbook? Is it through practical application within solicitations or actually on projects? And we want to try to figure out what is going to be the most useful way to present this terms after we get through these different exercises. So we're doing them in iterations. As you see, this first one is we're talking about the concepts of digital transformation as against modernization. And then we are looking to other terms as we go forward. And we have several companies in the Digital Services Coalition who are going to be helping us curate these conversations by finding our panelists and bringing these conversations to all of you all as we go along throughout the year. So hopefully there'll be enough information provided to reach all the different sectors of who we want to talk to and the different communities of practice, and really creating a good conversation between industry and government on this. So as we are getting started, we want to make sure that you are checking in with us. One of the things we are doing as part of this is also offering continuing education units or continuous learning points if you're in the government. So we want to make sure that you're getting this. So if you can't use the polling feature, you can email us at education@digitalservicescoalition.org, and we'll make sure that you get your certificates. If you are part of the whole iteration, we want to incentivize you to be part of that. So we're adding, we're creating the whole thing as 5 CLPs or CEUs. But if you're just able to make one or the workshop, you'll get credit for that. So we want to make sure we're tracking this along with all of you all. As we're getting started with this, please feel free to use the Q&As, the chats. We have a few moderators from the education community of our education committee, Christina Mack and Tabby Farrar, who'll be helping to moderate those as well. And feel free to raise your hand or reach out, and we'll have a good discussion with our panelists. So now I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have 5 great subject matter experts. All of them I have had the opportunity to work with and learn from in various stages of my life and journey on the digital service road, so to speak. And so after each introduction, after I introduce each of you, I'd like for you to give us a quick summary of how you got into the world of government digital services. So we're going to start off with Jay Teitlebaum, who is from the Office of the Federal Chief Information Officer, and he is the executive director there. So Jay, what got you into the world of government digital services?
All right, Traci, it is so good to see you again, as well as many names that I recognize today. So I will try and be brief. I think for folks that don't know me well, so I'm currently the executive director / chief of staff for the federal CIO's office, and previous to that, I was the chief of finance and operations with the U.S. Digital Service, where I got to know most of the folks that I'm talking to today. And what many don't know is that before that, I spent about a decade working at the Department of Homeland Security in the CFO's office. And I'd actually say that even before my time at USDS, really in the CFO's office is where I started to get this, like, be exposed, I would say, to the digital space. And a lot of it was through the lack of modern tools that I was able to use, that I had worked using corporate finance. I was familiar with a lot of things in the private sector that I didn't have in the government sector. So that was really the introduction. And then when I had the opportunity to work at USDS, it really piqued my interest. And even though I wouldn't consider myself a technologist by background, it is such an enabling tool to be able to help provide services to people. And that's what really excites me about it. And I will pause there.
Thank you so much, Jay. I love seeing you again. And next we have Shelby Switzer, who is the Director of Digital Services for the City of Baltimore, a relatively new role to take on. So can you please tell us how you got into the world of government services?
For sure. Yep. And we're so new. It's my third month on the job. Super excited. I got into digital services in government. I mean, really, I was working for a long time with different Code for America brigades in Atlanta and Denver and Boulder. And then I also had a lot of experience working with startups who were trying to serve government. And right before I joined the U.S. Digital Service, almost 4 years ago, I was working with a startup that was working with recipients of CMMI, or Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation grants. And then we had to start integrating with government systems. And it was a fun experience. And I felt like I just needed to come into federal government to see if I could help there be a better way. So that's how I got here. And it's been great since then.
Great, it's wonderful, and good job on the new job. So we're excited to see what Baltimore is going to provide for us. So, okay, and so I'm going to end the poll real quick while we're still introducing things. If you missed being able to enter your information in at this time, I'll have another chance at the end, and of course, you can always send an email, and we'll put that back up. But while I'm still doing introductions, I would also like to find out a little bit more about our audience as well. And so we are going to launch another poll here. Hold on as I find these. Oops. Sorry, polls are being a little tricky on me. Okay, I am not going to do that. Sorry, I will do that in a second. So we're going to continue on with Larry Bafundo, who's the Deputy Director of Technology for the Office of Unemployment Insurance Modernization, Department of Labor. So Larry, can you tell us about yourself and what got you into the world of government digital services?
Yeah, Larry, Department of Labor. My title is a mouthful these days, OUIM. So I got my start in digital services working in the private sector in the San Francisco Bay Area. I was working for a technology consultancy, working with mainly corporate clients, so big banks, enabling digital transformations, building products, et cetera. And then I got a project that came along in that role to work with IDEO to design a new voting system for Los Angeles County. And that voting system was a complete redesign, both in terms of the actual infrastructure, the digital experiences, and then the service design process to support running an election in the country's largest voting district, largest and most diverse voting district in the United States. And it really opened my eyes to the challenges facing the GovTech space and also the opportunities to apply modern principles and techniques. And so that experience brought me to 18F and then Code for America, where I worked at both federal, state, and local levels, and then most recently to Ad Hoc as VP of Digital Services.
Great. Thank you so much, Larry. Nice to have you on here and going back and forth between government and industry and back. That's I think we had a webinar on that last year. How's that experience been for you? Kind of the as we call it, the ping-ponging back and forth real quick.
I think it's been really great. You get to see, both sides of things and then, cross-train in different areas and try and apply different skill sets and experiences in both domains. So it's been interesting.
Okay, great. And next we have Mark Lerner, who's the Director of Federal Technology Strategy and Programming for Partnership for Public Service. Mark, can you tell us what got you into the world of government digital services?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. See some great familiar faces and a lot of people that I'm eager to get to know. I got my start in government digital services with the city of San Francisco. So I had been asked to support them or found an opportunity to support them in a pro bono capacity with their affordable housing software and initiative. And what they had asked for initially was, hey, can you help us redesign our website? And when I and a few other colleagues started working closely with them, we realized that there was more than just a website that needed to be rebuilt. It was a service that needed to be rethought from the perspective of the actual people being served, from the perspective of the community-based organizations. And so we really took to heart all of the principles that are laid forth in things like the digital services playbook and other guidelines of how to build digital services equitably and fairly. And I got bit by the bug. I used to be a software engineer in Silicon Valley, and then immediately after that San Francisco event, I left and went into government and never looked back.
Excellent. So happy to have you here, Mark, and also fulfilling kind of a different role in the partnership world, the nonprofit world. So going out and expanding into that world. And then we have, last but certainly not least, is Greg Godbout, who is the Chief Growth Officer with Fearless and also the former EPA Chief Technology Officer. Greg, what got you into the world of government digital services?
Thanks for having me, by the way. My wife sent me an application that said, go sign up to be a Presidential Innovation Fellow. I did that in like 2013, and I got accepted. And so being a PIF, a Presidential Innovation Fellow, brought me into the second rounds of PIFs. And from there, I kind of like, as Mark described, that was really when I fully discovered the full meaning of like digital services and digital transformation, and certainly the meaning that had for our federal government. So went on to help launch one of the founders and first executive director of 18F, and then went over to be the CTA at EPA, CTO at EPA, all totally fascinated and enamored with the digital transformation that our government needs to go through. And from that point forward, my career changed. So.
Well, thank you for coming as well and joining us. So I'm going to end this poll real quick and show you what we have. So we have quite a good mix of people who are both from industry, the digital service companies. We have several of our DITAP alumni, which is wonderful. I want to keep encouraging you all to understanding the digital world and government at any level, or joining us from academia, press, nonprofit, or other. So I think this is a great mix, and hopefully this will lend well to the conversation that we're going to have. So to start things off, I'd like everybody to kind of take a second as an opening exercise to think for a couple seconds about these two terms for yourself and define them in your own head and what they mean for you. And you can either, take a couple seconds to jot them down for yourself. You can throw them in the chat if you want to. This is just a way for you to kind of capture what you're thinking at the beginning of this conversation that these mean for you. So we'll go ahead and let you take a couple of seconds to do that for yourself. And now I'm going to turn it over to our panelists. We'll start with Greg, since you finish us off with introductions. If you can go really quick and kind of give us, what is your working definition of digital transformation as you use it and understand it?
Sure. For me, digital transformation is more about us being in the digital era, and it's the transformation necessary in order to have your services properly delivered in a new era, right? And so it's sort of a larger scale sort of thing that's happening to every industry. Every industry is being affected by this, and there's certain trends that happen and things like that come into standard. And another example of that is we talk about digital services, right? Those are services in the digital era. It's all about that like change in how services are delivered, because all of us have devices and we're all living digitally and everything's softwareized and stuff like that.
Great. Okay, Shelby.
So I really see modernization as really referring to the like kind of more narrowly the process of bringing us more up to date technologically, and transformation really about just the processes and rethinking the systems and using service design to like rethink how we do digital delivery, and rather than just say, for example, let's take a mainframe and put it in the cloud.
All right, Mark, what do you think about these terms?
It's so fascinating because it's already so different. Digital transformation for me is about leveraging the digital tools that we have available to us, which I would broadly categorize as like the internet, massive data storage, cloud computing, like that, those kinds of things to change how we do business, change how we offer services. Modernization for me, and I'm going to give a massive hat tip to my colleague and a person who's here in the chat with us, Amanda Gould. Modernization is when you take all of that and you also lace in equity, and you also lace in modern ways of working, and you talk about the fact that it's not just the digital tools, but it's also all the things that we now start to expect from our modern world.
Great. Thank you, Jay.
So because of my background, I'm going to give a little bit of a different twist on it, of how I think about this when it comes up. And so like for me, the modernization piece, like I'm not going to surprise anybody here, is kind of your quintessential government take of, can you actually modernize the system? And I'll use what you said, Greg, of like to be functioning in the digital era, meeting the needs of the public in a way that private sector companies do every day. But when I think about the transformation aspect of it, I think a lot more of like the holistic aspect for a government agency to be able to deliver it. And in order to provide that transportation, it's more than just the technology. It's also about, do you have the workforce that is capable of understanding things like service delivery and meeting the needs of the user? It's also about making sure that this is my favorite one actually, so I'll lead with it, or I'll go with it second, is do you have lawyers who understand this space as well? Looking at laws from decades or centuries ago that really don't apply to, or didn't apply to the way we think about the world today, but still using those in a way that benefits making sure that the government is moving forward. Always find a good lawyer and bring them along with you on any project you are working on, and it will pay a lot of dividends in the future. But really just looking at those different things, and I'll spit a few off of like the workforce, the legal aspect, the procurement world, which I will let my colleagues speak to. Thinking about what's in the future, like digital transformation is not just about like where we are today, but really what is gonna, like trying in that analogy of like skating to where the puck will be. And then with my specific background, like funding to me is really important, and thinking about how can you actually fund to be sustainable for digital transformation, and not just fund something one time and then it is what it is forever.
All right, and Larry, we'll finish off with you. I remember a couple months ago or so on LinkedIn, you're like, digital transformation definition? Why isn't anybody talking about this? And here's your
Right.
opportunity
Yeah.
to define the term for us.
Yeah.
You
I'm
can go
really,
which
I'm
one
really,
you wish for.
I'm really glad that we're having this conversation because I think these terms come up a lot. They come up a lot in my work at Department of Labor, you know, a $2 billion effort focused on IT modernization, and these words do mean very different things. So the definition I propose for modernization is not what most states or governments, I think, believe, but what we would propose is it is a continual process of addressing unmet needs, meaning it's not just a one and done state. It's not just about moving to the cloud. That's often how a lot of states in the unemployment insurance space think about modernization. And then transformation, like many others have said already, is a bit more holistic. I would anchor it really around organizational design. So it's about aligning people, process, and technology, but really changing how your organization works in order to deliver on outcomes. And so for that reason, I would also say digital transformation is a little bit similar to how we were thinking about customer experience, this idea of like holistic nodes and interfaces working together to support people in the context of a mission, although digital transportation is probably a bit more broader. And if I have a chance to talk about it a little bit later today, I will also say because of those things, most government agencies and government programs are not actually able to deliver on digital transformation and customer experiences because of how siloed they are.
Very true. You know, I want to kind of go into, we've talked about our definition of what it is. Why is it important? Who cares? Why are we doing this now? Why is it such a big thing? Why do we keep hearing it and become like the kind of the buzzword bingo of government and all of these things as we kind of talk about, you know, government's been improving technology for a long time. Why is there such an emphasis on this now? And I'm going to kick that off to Shelby.
Yeah, so why now and why does it matter? So, I mean, right now, I think we're just all coming to this point, you know, in so many aspects of our society and the ways that we live our daily lives where we are just shocked at any sort of interaction we have with government, or we have really low expectations to begin with. And then those expectations are met and confirmed. There was a saying, yeah, I can't remember the history of this, but there was a saying a long time ago, bad at history, this phrase, good enough for government, right? And this used to be a phrase that was like a mark of pride to say like, yes, this like manufactured item is like good enough. It's so good, it can be used by government, it can be used by soldiers. And now good enough for government is used pretty tritely to mean like, it's good enough for government, but not for anybody else. And we really need to change that. And like with every interaction we have with government, especially at the local level, that just kind of rings so true. And for me, it really matters because like, especially this idea of digital transformation, because when we talk about just modernization or like just kind of digitizing processes, like we're really, you know, just talking about a lot of times what I hear at least is people wanting to just put paper forms into online forms, which like, yeah, sure, we should do. But I also talk with users out in the public, even just today, that, you know, the paper form is like the least hard part. It doesn't, you know, it can be turned into a digital form. That's great. That'll be better for everybody. It can be more easily translated. It can be more equitable. But like, that's not the hard part about the process that the form starts. And so we need to really start thinking transformatively about the entire experience of service delivery and outcomes, and not just about like, let's kind of start using some tech because it's there.
Great. Thank you, Greg. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I really like, I mean, I agree. It's about the expectations, right? We live in the digital era, right? If you work for government, you don't work in the digital era, right? Unless you've been fully modernized at an agency or something, you know, to that sense where they've done the transformation and all of that stuff. So there is this huge gap between that expectations, and that gap gets larger and more appalling, I would say, when it's not addressed. And you know, when I came into government in 2013, the thing that struck me was my daughter was in elementary school and she had better tools than almost any government worker I met. And those tools were designed as the full service for digital services, right? Like or digital transformation, not like, oh, it's just a better technology, in the cloud or something. It's much more than that. It's the full holistic service is now in that digital era and needs to perform like those other ones. And it's just very different. And it's easy for us to see it, and it seems more alarming. But every industry's had to go through this transformation. Most industries started before government. Government was one of the last ones, and it still exists out there with large organizations still struggling with this.
Mark, I'd like to ask you, where have you seen digital transformations work well? And what made them successful? What was that element of success, or what was a metric of success that you would want people to know of? What is a metric or something that digital transformations need to follow, as you've seen it in any of the lives you've lived in this?
Yeah. I'll call out one example that I think is just really fascinating. So we recently put out a report at the partnership on the ways in which various different agencies have used cloud computing to deliver on their mission. And one of the examples that I just absolutely love is from NOAA, where they have planes flying in the middle of a hurricane using a wireless data transmission to transmit data live to data centers that's processed live, that's then sent out to weather stations live, that can then be used to make decisions about where to put resources, how to evacuate people, what guidance to give from a government level at federal, state, and local levels. And that's phenomenal. I think that none of that could have been possible without the kind of technology that will enable us to transmit information live, store it live, and use it very well. In terms of, how far that has come from where we were and where we can go from there, I still think that there is a lot of room for how close we bring all of our services to the public. And so what they did really well was, let's build out stuff that works for the mission. I'm always curious, okay, how does that work for the public in this case? Like, are they getting the information that they need? How is it built for the customer, the user, the end result in that sense? But it is an example that I absolutely love, and one that I'll tout.
Great, thank you. Larry, do you have any examples that you'd like to share with us?
In terms of effective transformations, I think that the story of the initial launch of VA.gov is one of them. I think that's fundamentally reorienting how individuals engage with an agency through a digital lens and digital mediums, but also reconfiguring people, staff, and processes to support those new processes. And so that obviously is an ongoing process at the VA, and there's a lot of people working on that right now. But I think that's in the right vein and lens in which to be thinking about this.
Great, thank you. And so kind of thinking through like the digital transformation side of things, where have you seen, or what does it look like when it's misused or misapplied? And not necessarily calling out the bad actors or that kind of sense, just like where have you seen examples or lessons learned that as you've gone through your work, you wish they kind of had a better understanding of what this really meant? Larry, do you have one for that?
Well, this is a thing I feel really passionately about, and maybe it's something that the DSC can help with. But so we've established that digital transformation requires a holistic approach, and that same with things like customer experience, like similar disciplines. Understanding how individuals interact with an organization and thinking about ways in which to deliver those services that are better suited for how they engage with the organization as opposed to how the organization is structured. And I think one of the mediums in which we approach this work and we show one way in which we're making progress is things like artifacts like customer journey maps, and service design and service blueprints, which are fantastic practices and good artifacts to help orient people and help marshal resources towards problems. But I have not yet quite seen personally good approaches that connect that higher level thinking with implementation for a number of reasons. One is that those service blueprints span multiple systems, processes, offices within agencies, and they also involve a whole host of characters, right? From design firms to implementation firms across those different groups. And in fact, when I was a vendor, even a lot of what I would hear from agencies is they also are crippled by, in some ways, the siloed nature of this work and are reliant on external actors to help show the bigger picture, right? So my main point there is that we have to be careful about overpromising in terms of what holistic experiences can deliver, without also addressing the fundamental organizational constraints within the problem. And it would be exciting to see in more procurements and in more government modernization efforts, organizational design being part of the strategy for figuring out how to better support citizens, in addition to the technology pieces.
Hey, Traci, can I add something to that?
Sure.
Yeah, Larry, I love that. Like, I got an example when I was at EPA, and it seems like forever ago, but when I was at EPA and the CTO, we went in to do a turnaround project on what was supposed to be a digital service, and they were going in the wrong direction. They were building a website when all they needed was an API, right? And so when we discovered that they need the API, the reason they were in trouble, the reason Congress was calling on them and OMB was calling on them like constantly, is this was one of those like red flag top 5 projects, right? And they were like, get this fixed, EPA. So we go in, we get it fixed. In 3 months, it's clear we can get 90% of the data through an API relatively quickly, and we can deliver in another 3 months, right? And so they're at that 3-month mark, and we're talking about delivering in 3 months, where they were originally in trouble for submitting to Congress. It was going to take them 3 years to build the website. And once we got there, everyone went, well, we can't do anything anyways. And we said, why? And they go, well, rulemaking. The process of rulemaking is going to take 3 years. And so, like, to your point exactly, I was like, well, then why weren't we also addressing rulemaking? And it was almost like, they were like, well, IT is always a problem. And I go, well, if IT is not the problem, underlying, like, you have process problems underneath. And that's like, as you peel back the onion. So kudos to your point. That's just another story illustrating it.
And I would love to jump into,
Sure.
yeah. So, I mean, so I'm a software engineer by background, and in engineering teams, everybody always likes to talk about Conway's Law, which is that you build systems that reflect the organization that they're contained within, or that builds them. And I feel like that's just so true of what we see in government. And for me, that's when I see like tech projects or service delivery projects fail or really get into risky territory, is when they aren't thinking about those organizational issues. And like, yes, I would love organizational design to be something that we could actually think about and implement. And I don't know how that happens in government, because it takes like high level authority to implement organizational design. And, especially at the federal level, when you have these kind of separations of powers, it makes it really hard to get them to work together, and to even empower people from different arms, including like the rulemaking or the legislative arm, to be talking with the executive arm. And then, I mean, that's a really big example, but it's just as hard interagency in the executive branch. And at the local level, like, it can really depend on if you have a strong mayor system or a chief administrator system, or a city administrator. So yeah, we need to rethink organizational design overall, but that really does impact how we have successful projects.
I think that gets to that real concept of the digital service kind of versus the transformation aspect and the modernization piece as well, is that what's bigger and broader than it. So I'm going to kind of go to the modernization aspect now. Jay, sitting in the hub of the world of the Technology Modernization Fund, what are you seeing coming out of there that are success stories that highlight what modernization is looking like, and where are those, how are those efforts kind of being shown now? Because it's been several years since the TMF has actually been, initiated, and now I think there's a few more rounds of projects that have gone through this. So what are you seeing from that aspect?
Yeah, and it was just the TMF's 5-year anniversary, so it was really exciting. And I'll say that it's always been a struggle to try and convince people, specifically Congress, that you might need a different funding mechanism in order to be successful in funding these transformative projects or digital transformation at large. And so normally I wouldn't do this, but I'm going to give you some numbers because I think it speaks volumes of how the TMF is doing. So the TMF did receive $1 billion as part of the American Rescue Plan, which is really, I think, a key moment. I mean, there was some funding before that, but it was really a key moment to say, like, all right, let's double down. Let's see what this fund can actually do. So it manages about $700 million for 38 investments across 22 federal agencies, and it's received over 220 agency proposals. So the thing that I love about the TMF is, well, many things that I love about it, but One is that it really allows for some of these cross-agency abilities. So where agencies are always fighting, well, who's going to get the money in order to do this? And then the other agency has to say, okay, well, we didn't get the money, but we still have to work with you. The TMF is able to give money to more than one agency, is able to figure out how to do this in a different sort of fashion. I'm not going to speak about any particular projects today. For those of you who don't know, unfortunately, by the way, I can't see the chat. One of the constraints of OMB, and then also some constraints on how much I'm allowed to talk about for different specific projects and proposals and things. But that being said, I think it's really interesting to talk about the TMF's maturing over the years. So in OFCIO, the federal CIO, Claire Martirana, is the chair of the Technology Modernization Fund. We work extremely closely with the executive director of the TMF, Raylene Young, over in GSA. And the PMO in GSA has really grown leaps and bounds, both in terms of people, but in terms of bringing in expertise to do evaluations of the project proposals. And I'm not going to give you all the different information that they're looking for in the project proposals, but it's really looking at more of these things that we're talking about for digital transformation than it is specifically for modernizing a specific project. Like there are times where an agency just needs a little bit of money. They've got all the plans and everything, but the TMF is really looking at, can they actually be successful in this space? Do they have a procurement strategy that will work? And like, are we sending money out there that's actually going to be invest wisely? Is this something that we could scale across to other places as well? Like, could what one agency uses TMF funding for be a lesson learned for another agency that's having the same sort of problem? So I think that's really an interesting area to look at. And I will also do a little bit of a pitch, like tmf.cio.gov has a full listing of all the projects on there and some stories about it. Highly encourage people to check it out.
Great. Thank you so much, Jay. I think that's probably pretty neat to see, especially from sitting in the USDS perspective. When we thought about things 5 years ago, we're always like, government moves so slow. And now you're looking at 5 years later when all of a sudden it almost is a blink of the eye. And now it's, hey, there's a 5-year anniversary of something that was just coming out and being like, what is going to happen with this?
Yeah. And sorry I want to say one more thing about it that actually I think connects to one of the prior points. But I think there's a lot of investment where people are looking at giving money to the shiny new object. Like, we want to build the shiny new object, and it can be done, and people in government miraculously make things happen. But you're not really helping shore up the foundational level of that agency. So you're building something new and shiny off of a shaky foundation. So like, you're setting yourself up for failure in the future, but you're also not benefiting yourself in other ways. So I think that's something that not just the TMF, but just spending in general, really starting to look at, like, how can we do this differently to make sure that we're, maybe we need to build the new feature or product, but how do we actually do it in a way that we're making sure that we're strengthening the foundation of the agency at the same time?
Thank you so much for that, Jay. Does any of the other panels have an example of where modernization went right for them, specifically different than the digital transformation concept we were talking about earlier?
I'd like to call out one thing. So again, I think I differ from other folks in my definitions, where modernization for me is the bigger one than digital transformation. But the key that digital is there first. If it was transformation versus modernization, that'd be different. But I love I can't remember the technical term for it, but like the life events that the administration has a focus on right now. Mm-hmm. I think that, to me, is government modernization. It is the acknowledgement, and obviously these are things that are still being worked on. It is, slow moving in terms of how much effort is being put behind it, but it is a thing where the government is now actually saying, moments that matter, incredible. We now care less about our own internal structures, Shelby's point about Conway's law, and more about what's actually happening in your life. And that, to me, is meeting people where they are. That, to me, is modernizing to reflect people's actual needs. And I cannot wait to see the results of all that work.
Can you explain what the life event is just a little bit more, in case people aren't exactly sure what that is or what is kind of in conjunction with?
I'm going to do my best, but I'm going to butcher it. So I believe that it was in the CX executive order where 5 particular life events were called out that says, hey, as a federal government, we need to have a unified response to these specific life events, such that when someone is going through it, such as financial hardship, or I think it was maybe the birth of a child or the death of a loved one or something along those lines, we are able to respond in a unified manner. So you're designing for the needs of the actual person, the public in that specific space, rather than here's an application you have to go through with FEMA, here's one with Small Business Administration, here's one over in this agency, and everyone's sort of doing it differently. What can we do to create something that actually meets people where they are?
So it's looking at the end user as a persona, that they have a lot of things they are going to have to connect with, and each individual government entity is just one part of what might have to happen in the journey for that person.
That's exactly right. And a huge call out to the folks in the chat for being smarter on this than I am.
Hey, Traci, I have another example, just from a positive example around modernization. Since a lot of my other comments have been very punchy about what's not working. But for the definition I proposed for modernization was a continual process, right, of addressing unmet needs, and not this binary state of modernized or not. And so one of the things that we're doing with states as part of our program, in particular the state of New Jersey, is we're not only helping that state in particular improve the claimant experience around intake, so how people apply for or submit a claim for unemployment insurance, but also working with the state to decouple that aspect of their system so it's easier to change, maintain, and manage, and install foundational principles and capabilities like DevOps and automated testing, so that those changes are easier to make for the state moving forward. So that's both like a improvement in the moment in time, and also layering in additional capabilities that help sustain that progress moving forward, which I think both aspects are important here, since we're looking at these services over the long haul.
Great, thank you. So one of the things I also want to have a quick discussion around before we go into some Q&A and see if people in the chat or anybody, if you have questions, you can start putting them in now, or we'll have an open conversation around this as well. But there is also talk around, we have a lot of people representing both the commercial world and have commercial clients versus the government world as government clients. And it used to be that there was a pretty sharp divide between what was government specific work and what was commercial world. But now as we're getting into technologies and tech and modernization that is more being defined by the commercial world, where do you see those gaps coming in, or where have you had to change for government, or what do you think is important in that government aspect for taking on these roles versus what you see in the commercial world? Or what can government, I know there's a lot of questions in this, just giving you food for thought on this, but what can government do to start capturing more of what's being done in the commercial world? So I'm going to open that up to Greg.
Oh my, there's much. But it is, I think you're seeing like similar practices come in, and then they'll say, we want someone with commercial experience. And then you see an acquisition that's like, and what is your government ID, and what's been your government experience, or something like that. But I would say beyond those things, it would be interesting for me is like, as we work in the commercial world, like with our client, like NFL or Exelon or some of these large commercial groups, they're very comfortable with us coming in and doing a short design session, right? Like we go in there and it's almost, I feel like what is business development in commercial world is really like a small paid prototype, right? Or not quite an MVP, but something that you could show them what you're doing with a design element in there to interview. And then from there, they decide whether they're going to fund the next larger thing. And you see elements of that of people trying to do those types of innovations inside of government, which is pretty cool. But I think I'd like to see more of that, where it's like, hey, let's do some design sprints around this thing and see what companies can do and see what each one pitches, and then quickly and rapidly move to the larger contract. I don't think we're quite there yet, right? Like across the board, but that type of behavior, I like that aspect on the commercial side. It would require a different framework of employment and hiring inside the companies that have been serving government for so long, but I think there's value there for the government on that side.
Anyone else want to take a stab at that one? Shelby, thoughts?
I'll just say that I think government and government employees for too long have been told that they need to buy things that are being sold just to government, and in terms of software, in terms of lots of things. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but it's awful. So I just want to say that like we really need to get into like a culture change within government teams around the types of tech that we're buying and using. And we shouldn't be getting government licenses for things instead of just like the basic, gold license for a SaaS product that we want to use. There really is no reason in most cases to have a government specific version of a SaaS product or any other tech. There are obviously exceptions. And often what I find is that the government version of something that's being sold to government is often stripped down of important features and more expensive than if you were in the private sector. And we also, I think to me, something big that I see regularly too is that government people, because we're thinking in the terms of government technology and terminology. So for example, we're thinking about permits for any number of things. And the word permit is actually used for loads and loads of things in government at least at the local level, when really like we're actually talking about like projects or events or inspections and like things that to the average person in the public isn't a permit. And because we're looking for government terminology in the products that we buy and the tech that we use, then we're limiting ourselves a lot to vendors who have learned to speak that government terminology and are selling us things that are specifically for what we think we're looking for. And it's really limiting. And it means that we can't use like really generic project management software or like industry kind of standards around like any SaaS product. So I think we just need to like really get out of this bubble that we're in where we think we have to buy things that are being sold to government instead of just buying things in the commercial sector.
I'm gonna get in on that one just a little bit. So tell us how government people can learn more about the market intelligence that they would need to make those decisions. Where do you find information that you use to find new products and new services and things that you'd be looking at?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it's kind of establishing a culture of doing market research to begin with, which I don't think always happens, or market research is initially scoped to only look at government vendors or things that have been sold to other cities or other governments. So, I mean, definitely talking with other governments and seeing what they're buying and what's working, what's not working is a really great thing to do. And we need to do more of that. But we should also just be expanding our pool of conversations and asking like our friends and neighbors what they use in their enterprise company, and like just being more open about learning and exploring and trying new things. And so many products out there have freemium versions, and we should be encouraged and allowed to try the freemium versions out for things, which often, I've experienced pushback for in government.
That was one of the wins we got at USDS was increasing the micro purchase threshold from 3,000 to 10,000 for the idea of being able to purchase software licenses and hardware licenses to try before you buy. So that was definitely one of the things we used in that conversation. So little steps. Anyone else from the panel? Mark, you have?
Yeah, I want to make one note about how to think about the different kinds of products and services and the people that you would work with. And I think that, Shelby's point is I want to do like a yes and, like Shelby's point of like government shouldn't, there are a few reasons why government would need a product that is different from what commercial organizations use in terms of like project management, in terms of collaboration. I do want to make a big call out to one of the things that makes people that are part of the Digital Services Coalition different, which is an understanding of what public stewardship means, right? There are companies, there are people, there are groups that understand that one of the things that makes government mission very different is public stewardship, public trust, public data, the fact that we respond to the public and are owned by the public in government. And companies that understand that versus companies that don't, products that understand that versus products that don't, those are going to make a huge difference. And so I just want to call out that one distinction and why I love all the work that you're doing, Traci.
Thank you so much. And that is a great distinction. Stewardship is definitely a key delineator in that. So I want to open it up now for questions. Do we have any anyone that has a question for the panel in general, or any specific follow-ups?
I just wanted to have a follow-up to Mark, and I do totally agree. And I think that being judicious about what you're choosing to, so I mean, I think one, there's like a difference between building and buying. And if you are just buying, I think it's important to be judicious about what you're buying and like the privacy and data concerns. So for example, like I do not advocate for using Google Analytics on government websites because I don't think there should be government tracking software or private corporation tracking software on government websites. I think we should be able to do that ourselves or use an open source version that we can self-host. But so I do agree. I think the stewardship aspect is really important and should be a consideration.
So bringing in the ethical components of it as well as just looking beyond the tech, which I know there's a lot of talk around that going on. We might have to save that for another webinar on its own discussion. So opening it up to questions. Don't be shy. We've got a great round of panelists here.
I think maybe just piggybacking off of Shelby's comment, like that's another thing too that we see at the Department of Labor. And Shelby, I know you're also really familiar with the work there from your previous role, where like it'd be helpful to better understand what are effective use cases and guardrails for emerging technologies that we know can make a difference, but haven't yet been established from a policy standpoint. Like we see this a lot in and around automation. And so, for example, like we know that there are lots of technologies and tools out there that help translate, like Google Translate, for example, but others. And you know, like the Department of Labor from a UI modernization program or policy perspective, like still doesn't really endorse non-human translation. So that forces states into a high cost, difficult to sustain approach in order to establish equitable pathways to benefits, right? There has to be a better way. And so like, how do you inform policy that allows agencies to leverage technology more effectively and humanely and through you know, targeted use cases, experimentation, governance, et cetera. Those are all things that I think could be helpful to come from the outside to help formulate stronger internal policies and perspectives that benefit people.
Great. So I'm going to kind of go through a lightning round. If anybody has any questions, feel free to jump in. But to kind of round this out, I want to thank all of our panelists very, very much for coming in and taking the time to speak with us. I think there's a lot of great points that we're going to key off of this when we actually go into the workshop. I can see where there's some of the pillars already being created underneath each of the terms and concepts. But just in terms of thinking through the maturity of organizations that you've seen, or thinking through things when you're looking at evaluating who's doing what in the space, from your own self personally, what does it look like for an organization to be mature? We've heard some of these terms, but I'd like you to kind of do some lightning round conversations on this. What does maturity look like in implementing digital transformations? Jay, I'm going to kick it off with you. Sorry.
Oh my goodness. So many thoughts. The first one that comes to mind for me, again, I'm going back to kind of the business function aspect of like, do you actually have people in your organization who understand this space and can manage contractors, can manage projects, understand service delivery? Like, I think that's the beginning of the maturity journey of making sure that you have the people who understand and know what they're talking about.
Great. Shelby?
I agree with that. I'm trying to think of what I would add. I think that I would add that there's also there's just so much training that needs to be done. And I think for me, like, I'll consider an organization mature if there is at least one person within a small unit of team that can do service design and use some basic visualization technology to like map out a process. I just feel like that's so important. It's missing all the time.
Excellent. Mark?
Question is, what's an indicator of maturity?
Mm-hmm.
Using data to drive decisions.
Okay, great. Greg?
Yeah, I think there's different levels of maturity. We might have people saying like something's mature just because it's moving to the next level. But I think service design is key. So human-centered design or service design is some level of like our users or the humans in the production being considered in the production process. If a group is regularly pushing and doing that, I consider them one of the mature ones. I would add to that is some sort of algorithm around how many of their applications are truly in the cloud and efficiently in the cloud, and do they work in the cloud comfortably? Are they in that natural state? I think the cloud aspect is a really important one. And then automation around their tools, whether it's custom development, configurations, things like that, lots of automated tools that are helping processes move fast with lots of fast cycles into production.
Traci, you are muted.
That would be me. Sorry, Larry.
Yeah, I think this is a great question. Really, really hard. I think it's a mix of what lots of others have said already. I think it's first and foremost clear, measurable outcomes or clear outcomes for the transformation with an understanding of the technology and policy levers that need to be taken. And I think it's the existence of feedback loops to help gauge progress towards those outcomes. And finally, most importantly, empowered set of actors to drive that strategy, which in itself could probably be unpacked and defined. But without all three of those levels, I think it could be really challenging. I see that Shelby said something similar there.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you very much for everyone who's attended, and to our panelists again for bringing their wonderful expertise and knowledge to this. As we mentioned before, we are allowing people to get continuous learning points for this. And then we have a workshop in April where we'll be following up and taking these ideas and putting them into some kind of working format of what we've distilled and collaborated on with this, and then giving that back out to the world, so to speak, from the DSC and government partners in a conversation. So again, if you are interested in continuing on with this, signing up for more information, it's education@digitalservicescoalition.org. We will also be sending out a summary of the conversation we had today, as well as more in-depth bios and information on our panelists. So if you had anything that you wanted to ask or want to have a follow-up conversation with any of them specific to what they're working on, you'll have that opportunity. Again, thank you all very much, and I hope to see you in the future at the webinars as well as our workshops. So thank you.